Let's spend some time now talking about dystopian fiction. To help me to do this, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the author LG Jenkins. She's the author of a series of young adult books called the Merit Hunters series. These books are fast-paced and immersive, but they'll also help readers to think about their true worth and God-given purpose. LG Jenkins is with us now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, James. It's a privilege.
I'm really excited to talk to you today, and I wonder if we can begin at the start and hear a little bit about your faith story.
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in a Christian home in a Baptist church in Nottingham. I now live in York, but I was born and raised in Nottingham. And yeah, I'd say that I've obviously always been very aware of the gospel, having grown up with it, but I probably had a period between the ages of 9 and 12 where I really wasn't interested. I just was more interested in making friends than having anything to do with church or God. I still went along on a Sunday with my family, but I was going in a different direction, let's say. And then I actually went on a school trip to York, which is where I live now. And it was kind of a blessing in disguise that there was an incident to do with my behavior and all of those sorts of things that sort of knocked me sideways. And actually, I believe in hindsight, it was God redirecting my path. And so then I changed friendship groups and a load of things happened. And I started to get a little bit more interested and a little bit realizing that my faith journey was my own to have. And asking more questions at youth group, getting very involved in youth group. Some of my greatest memories are from that time during my teenage years, having like-minded friends around me from youth group who also were pursuing God. And so, yeah, by the time I was 14, I was very much like, no, this is real for me. And I believe in what Jesus did for me. And I believe that he's pursuing me and I want to pursue him. And so I was baptized when I was 14. Then went on to go to uni, did English literature. I was very involved in the Christian Union and all of those things. But I would say that it wasn't until lockdown that I really understood what it meant to pursue a very intimate relationship with God. I think before I was, believing everything, believing in evangelism, believing in reading your Bible, all of those things. But then I think during lockdown, because I had that time to slow down and step back, I started to realize what the relationship with Jesus is really about. And it's about living life to the full with him in it, through all the suffering, through all the pain, actually in everyday pursuit of what he wants for my life, rather than it being follow these sort of things and you'll kind of get on okay. It's actually, no, God is there in it all with you. So I'd actually say my faith journey in terms, it's come on leaps and bounds just in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know if that gives you a good overview.
Absolutely, it does. And I love hearing people's faith story. Actually, I can compare my story a little bit to yours. Like you, some of my happiest memories are in Christian youth groups. And I don't think we do enough as a church to celebrate those people who volunteer in Christian youth groups week after week, because that was such an important part of my story as well. But also serving in Christian unions at university. UCCF and Fusion, I know who run Christian unions, do such a fantastic job. So if any of you are listening to this, first of all, thank you very, very much. Now, I'm speaking to you today because you've released this excellent series of young adult books, which are called the Merit Hunters series. And it's set in a dystopian world. And I love dystopian fiction. So I'm keen to talk about it. But for any of our listeners who haven't come across dystopian fiction before, can you introduce us to the genre?
Yeah, of course. So dystopian books are usually set in the future in some sort of world where there's some sort of oppression from governmental control, or the world has been hit by some sort of virus or disaster. And so the setting is often very bleak, very depressing. Your common dystopian books that people will have heard of are like 1984 by George Orwell, and more recently, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And often I believe it lends itself to inspirational stories about hope. So yeah, I don't know if that gives it a good overview.
Absolutely, that does answer the question, but it leads me to think about something else as well, because I think about how so many of our young people struggle with their mental health. And
Mhm.
how do you wrestle with that in your writing? Because the world in the Hunger Games is a good example that you just give. It's a very depressing world. How
Yeah.
do you tackle those ideas in your own work?
Yeah, so The Hunger Games really, I believe, is a comment between the massive gap between the rich and poor. And actually, we see Katniss be the sort of representation of rising up against adversity and having the bravery to do that, as well as images of teenage self-expression. With my world, mine is very much a comment on the way social media, technology, and modern working society has skewed our perception of our own validation. So, in terms of our achievements and accolades being the things that determine our worth to society, which is a sort of lie that I've had to unlearn. And through writing these books, I have been doing that. So I think really through writing, to answer your question, through writing in a sort of more depressing setting, more oppressive environment, it's helped me to realize the things that are truly important and therefore how you can actually fight back against those lies that you might be believing.
I wonder if you can introduce us to the story behind the series.
Yeah, so it's set in a city called Chulo, which is a world where only the productive are rewarded. So each citizen has a merit score, and everything they do in life either adds points or detracts points from their merit score. And that score determines what lifestyle they can lead. My story follows a young professional couple, AJ and Jenny, who are both striving and working really hard to get to the top of society, but they each have secrets that threaten not only their relationship, but also their ambition. And so the stakes become really high as we go along in the story, particularly for Jenny at first, because she's an artist, she's a painter, which is a pastime that doesn't get her any merit points because it's not seen as that valuable. And so we see her in the first 10% of the first book, Son of Endless Days, really grapple with that and see her, the desperate lengths she goes to try and maintain that habit while maintaining her merit score. And it gets life-threatening very, very quickly.
Now, your publisher very kindly sent me a couple of extracts from the first book, which I have to say I absolutely loved. And I know in the introduction I called it young adult books, but in the same way that I enjoyed The Hunger Games, I really enjoyed your writing as well. And it's
Oh,
not
thank you.
just for young adults, is it? Anybody that enjoys this genre of fiction would be able to easily pick it up and engage with it.
Oh, absolutely. I actually describe it as young adult with a new adult crossover. So really, a lot of the ideas have come from my own experience as someone in their early 20s going into the working world. So I would say anyone from 14 and up can enjoy this and will have aspect of the character's experience that they will relate to. One of my biggest fans is my husband's 8-year-old granddad. So it's
Well,
certainly not just for teenagers.
there are three books in the series in total. When you started out to write it, how did it work? Did you map out the whole story, or does the story reveal itself to you as you go along?
Just to say, there's actually four. There's another one coming because I couldn't finish it in 3 books. Um, Initially, no, I didn't. I knew how the first book was going to end from the start, and I knew that ending would lend itself to another book. And it wasn't until I finished the first draft of that first book that actually the whole story arc for the remaining 3 came to me. Not all of the details, but I knew where the central character AJ, I knew what character arc he was going to go on. And so I would say it was the ending I always knew the ending of the first book, and once I'd done that, that's when the rest of it came to me.
So if it's a series of two, it would be a duology. If it's a series of three, it would be a trilogy. What is actually a series of four?
I think it's a quartet.
Ah, yes. See, now that makes sense. I'm disappointed at myself for having having to ask the question. Sorry, I was going to say, did you enjoy writing the quartet?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I've done the first draft of the fourth book already. And actually, that's been one of the most enjoyable ones to write because everything that happens in the fourth book happens within a day. So that's been really fast paced and really exciting to how can I keep the reader hooked through the events that are happening in very short succession. Yeah, sorry, I've lost the question of what you said.
No, I was just talking about whether you enjoyed writing it. I imagine that a lot of work has to go into writing a series like this. You have to keep checking to make sure that everything is accurate. Your characters aren't doing things they're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
How does that all work? How much time do you get to spend working on it?
So the first two I wrote during lockdown. Well, the first one, it was sort of half of 2019, but yeah, the first two were in lockdown, so I had a lot more time on my hands. At the moment, I probably spend, I'm trying to figure out, maybe 10 hours a week working on my own books. Because I also work part-time for my publisher and some other freelance bits and bobs as well. And it does take an incredibly long time. And the world building, exactly as you were saying, can be, a real pain sometimes. I remember I was doing the draft of the first book and I'd like written this whole sort of character trajectory on where they were going to go in the city, and then quickly realized that there's one tiny comment in book one that puts a building in a completely different location in the city. And so then I had to read, and it's just one sentence. And most readers probably wouldn't notice, but some actually absolutely would. And I would know. So, so I was like, right, I'm going to have to completely change the whole structure of what I've done for the last book, just because that building's in a slightly different place to what I imagined. But I've always found that world building in particular has come very naturally to me. I've had a lot of readers say that the world building is really strong, and it wasn't something I particularly struggled with. And I only noticed recently that as a kid and growing up, when I watched animations and just films set in different worlds, the little details always stuck out to me. So I think a lot of the film flushed away, but about the rats in the sewers and that. I always remember that the roofs of their houses were upturned newspapers. I always remember details like that. And so I don't know whether it's just something that I've always been fascinated by and my creative juices just go by those tiny details, but it's something that's come very naturally to me.
It is a real skill, though, isn't it? Because I think of the most famous example is probably Middle Earth in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and the world building in that is absolutely.
Well, yeah, that's just sensational. I mean, I've not made my own language. I couldn't do that.
And he spent years on building his world as well, and it's probably not even complete now because other people continue to add to it. So his son Christopher Tolkien is constantly adding to that world building, and wow, I wonder if that'll happen with your books one day. Somebody else might take them on.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that. I'd love to see how readers could be inspired by something I've put out there. That would be a real honor and a privilege to watch that happen.
Well, talking about being inspired by your readers, I have to say, you've got some really good reviews on Amazon and Goodreads. And I know a lot of authors are really, really keen to get good reviews on those sites. How essential are those reviews for you as you try to grow your audience?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it's a real encouragement, because sometimes I get a bit down in the dumps about the fact that I don't have that many yet. But it is a good encouragement to say, but the ones I do have are really strong. And so it's important in several ways. One, because it gives potential readers the confidence that they're picking up a book of quality and that purchase that they're going to make is a good one. But two, they're just so important for me as a writer. There are times where it is really hard and it's hard to persevere, and you sort of think, why am I doing this? I can't really get my books out there. It's a crowded market. It's noisy. How do I break through that? And sometimes it just takes going back to those reviews and reading them to be like, no, come on, keep going.
And one thing I'd like to encourage our listeners to think through is that when they read a really good book, so like yours or another Christian book that perhaps we've recommended on this program, it's always a great idea to leave a review, even if it's short, because they really can help the writer as they try to build their audience, but it can also boost the book up the algorithm. So maybe we could say today, if you've read a good Christian book over the past few weeks, please write a review about it, because that would really help the author in question.
Absolutely.
I've really enjoyed this conversation today, Lydia. Obviously, you've got book 4, which you're currently working on, as you've spoken about. But after that, have you got any other stories in mind? Have you decided what's next for you?
Yeah, I've got so many story ideas, which is something my teachers always used to tell me off for, because I tried to put too many ideas into one paragraph. Yes, I'm thinking of writing a dystopian romance set in the same world, because that's very much a genre that I think people in my audience would enjoy. And romance is an area that I would like to explore, to develop my craft. And then I do have a few other ideas which are completely separate to this world, but I don't think they'll be imminent. They might be a couple of years down the line. Well, one based on Ecclesiastes, which I'm quite excited about.
Oh, well, when you bring that one out, I'd love to read it. I'm obviously interested in dystopian romance. Obviously, that would be something that would interest me. But just as we bring this interview to a close today, one of the things that I've really begun to notice in the past couple of years is the popularity in books of people of your age again. Mm-hmm. When I was in my 20s and 30s, there was this thought pattern that people would give up on reading, that maybe people would use their electronic devices and maybe like a Kindle, and paper books would fall out of fashion. But now whenever I go into my local bookstore, it's full of young people buying mostly dystopian romance books. And my local bookstore in the Trafford Centre has a whole section of TikTok recommended books. How important is social media sites like TikTok for a young author like you?
Yeah, massively important. It's something that I would say I probably spend a good 5 to 6 hours a week at the moment, just developing social media content. And it is how we reach new readers. And it's an authentic way of people actually getting to know me a little bit in terms of the other books that I'm reading, what I would recommend, and also a little bit about my story, my values, the sort of ideas about success and all that stuff that I cover in my books. It's really, really important. And I think there is an element of consumerism that is driving that sort of push from younger readers. There's a bit of a collectible icon that you've got a full bookshelf at home with all the beautiful editions of these popular romanticises and dystopian fiction. So there's consumerism driving it all the time. But I do think one of my friends, actually, she's a strong reader, and she says it's the one thing that she can do that helps her not think about other things. It's the one thing that truly helps her to escape. And now we could probably have a full conversation, James, for about an hour about whether that's a good or a bad thing, or, the balance of that. But I think that's a big thing for young people, that actually the world is quite confusing, and it's getting even more confusing with all sorts of things going on. And actually reading is a really good way to potentially explore those ideas within a safe environment.
Well, Lydia, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme today. Just a quick reminder, the series that we've been talking about today is called the Merit Hunters series. It's authored by our guest today, LG Jenkins. Lydia, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me, James. It was great.